Okay. So, this is the second episode of our Misery Movies podcast, which is, I guess, a feature. I don't know what you'd call it, of miserytourism.com. Got to get the website URL up front there, so that the two people who listen to this on iTunes will also visit the website. That's actually maybe an optimistic estimate to people, but we'll see. Um, so as I said, this is the second episode of our Misery Movies podcast. I'm joined. I'm William. I'm the editor-in-chief, I guess, of miserytourism.com. I'm joined, as I was last time, by Sarah.
Hey, y'all.
By AJ.
Hello.
And by my fellow site founder this time, who wasn't able to make it last time, Rudy.
Hey.
Everyone is
here? The whole team is here. So for this episode, we're going to be discussing The Redemption of General Butt Naked, which is a documentary. It's the first documentary we're doing on the podcast. It only took us 2 episodes to get to child soldiers, which I'm pretty proud of. But there is less incest than there was last time, which for some of our viewers may be a relief. For others, may be a disappointment. I guess we'll see. Anyone who was hoping that this was going to be like the incest cast after last time is probably tuning out right now. Oh, no incest? What the fuck? So, but instead of incest, what we have is a documentary about a reformed Liberian warlord. Just to provide some context and some background, from 1989 to 2004, Liberia was in the nation of Liberia, which for those of you who are not geography buffs is actually somewhere in Africa. Did I do my research? No. But between 1989 and 2004, Liberia was in a state of almost constant civil war. Technically, I found this out by doing a little bit of research because the documentary blurs this point a little bit. It's technically 2 civil wars. There's a civil war that goes from 1989 to 1997, and then another civil war that goes from 1999 to 2004. So there was a brief period of peace, détente anyway, after Charles Taylor took power, but it didn't last long. Anyway, so the nation of Liberia spent, a decade and a half in near complete chaos. The original president was overthrown and he was executed on camera. And Charles Taylor, who's the rebel leader, managed to gain power in the country. Then, as I said, 2 years later, he gets overthrown. You have another few years of civil war. In the midst of this civil war, which was a really ghastly, bloody affair, right up front, the documentary lets us know that 250,000 people were killed. But this kind of a vacuum, this kind of a just state of chaos is it's just a perfect place for wartime atrocities to occur, right? No one was thinking about the Geneva Convention during the Liberian Civil War. And as a result, a number of the generals and other leaders it wouldn't even be fair to call them questionable, just absolutely detestable tactics, I guess, one of which was the use of child soldiers. And one of the generals who was leading a brigade of child soldiers was a man by the name of Joshua Milton. I want to make sure I get his last name right. It's Bly,
I think it's
I'm
supposed.
sorry, was by the name of Joshua Milton Bly, but he's more popularly known as General Butt Naked because he would lead his soldiers into battle absolutely fucking naked, or sometimes apparently, according to Wikipedia, in women's clothing. But I guess general like drag queen was taken or something. General butt naked, uh, and so he was, even by Liberian warlord standards, he was pretty brutal, pretty nasty. Uh, how many casualties he and his soldiers are responsible for seems to be ambiguous, but he was not a good dude, and he'd basically get his child brigade stoned and drunk, have them stripped down to their skivvies or less, and then lead them into a village and have them slaughter women, children, whoever they could find. Anyway, this goes on until about 1996, and then General Butt Naked disappears. And he leaves the front in Liberia, and he ends up in exile elsewhere in Africa. And he's gone until after both civil wars end in 2004. And then he rematerializes again, and suddenly he is he's Joshua Milton Bly, traveling preacher. He's an evangelist. And he starts talking about his conversion experience, and he starts talking about how he's been redeemed, how Jesus Christ, he's taken in Jesus Christ as his Lord and Savior, and he has become a new man. And that's kind of where the documentary picks up. And the central question, I guess, is, well, how legitimate is this redemption? Like, has this man really made a complete 180 turn? Has he become a completely different human being? And also more general questions of like redemption and reconciliation after the aftermath of something this horrific, or in the aftermath of something this horrific. So with that in mind, I guess I want to launch into our reviews here, go around the table and have people talk about their first impressions of the film. As we did last time, we're going to have a spoiler-free section in the beginning here, where we go through and just review the film in a general sense, to give you a sense for those of you who haven't seen it. And this is a pretty obscure film, so I'm guessing that you haven't. Give you a chance to have the film reviewed, get a sense of what it's about, before the film is totally spoiled. And then about halfway through the podcast, or once the reviews are over, we're going to do a deeper dive into the movie, and we'll let you know spoilers from here on out. Okay. With that in mind, does anyone want to get us started talking about the film?
I'll go. I decided not to do any research on this film before I watched it. But you definitely got me on Butt Naked. That made me very curious. Was that really what he was called? Yes, it was. And it's funny because I've never heard of that, where you would have this army go completely naked. And I think what was his reasoning? He said he felt like it gave them more power. Was that what it was? Something about
it was almost a spiritual kind of thing. There might be some loose parallels to like the ghost dance here, where at one point, I don't know if this was in the movie or in like a little bit of research I did outside, but he actually believed that he could go invisible, that he could become invisible if he was naked. Also, but it was more of either like a spiritual, mystical experience kind of thing, or a psychological trick, right? That when you go into battle completely nude, for some odd reason, it can actually increase your confidence. And he told them, like, you're bulletproof, right? You're naked and you're bulletproof. And so the perception was, just like with the ghost dance, the perception was that you are somehow immune to the enemy's bullets. You're somehow immune to, you're not going to get killed. You're not going to get wounded. because you're partaking in this kind of this ritual, right? I guess that must be part of it, but certainly you need a lot of confidence, I would imagine, to go into battle.
I think I'd be worried about all my loose bits if I did that. Oh my God, no, I would be such a target. I really don't understand that, but I guess my first impression was that, okay, he's mentally ill to be doing that, and then I mean, I guess throughout the movie, you do wonder, is he legitimate, or is it just that he didn't have a choice? He had to change, otherwise he was going to get murdered or thrown into prison. I found myself questioning that throughout, even though I almost kind of liked him, which made me question myself too, because it's hard to like someone who killed so many people.
Well, the first siren to the podcast of AJ.
But all in all, I really liked it, even though it was so fucking depressing. And it really was. And when you find out just how many people he takes responsibility for killing, it's like, oh my God, how could somebody do that? How can you live with yourself? Even though you say, oh God has forgiven me.
Oh, hold on a second. I'm going to cut this part out of the final podcast. Just hold tight for a minute.
My apologies. Sorry for continuing to kill people.
Okay. Okay, Sarah, you can pick up and.
Oh shit! Where did I leave off? No, I think it's interesting the fact that somebody can do all of those evil things and still live with themselves. So that also made me question, how good of a person is he now? And again, like I'm not a religious person, so all that religious stuff was like ugh. But it also served a better purpose, because if that's what it takes for him to reform himself, okay, it's a good thing. And then the people, he tracks down people that he hurt, people whose families he murdered, and he asks for their forgiveness. And I guess a surprising amount of people do decide to forgive him.
Yeah, I think we're going to get in the spoiler inclusive version of the podcast. I want to talk in some detail about those moments when he meets one of the people who he or his soldiers brutalized, basically killed, people who have lost members of their family, who were otherwise victimized by his butt-naked brigade, how they respond when he comes to them looking for forgiveness, and how just that entire act, those scenes are some of the most bizarre and interesting scenes in the movie, and I don't want to get really in depth on those later, but
actually, I found myself wondering how he went so long without being assassinated. Really,
I definitely wondered that too.
Yeah, you think there'd be one person at least who'd be like, you know what, you murdered my family, I'm gonna kill you. Yeah. Never happened. I couldn't believe it, because he's right out there in the open, and he's telling everybody what he did.
I think part of the reason might be just because after the war, probably 10% of the Liberian population or more probably had war crimes on their hands, so it's like where do we start?
Yeah.
Rudy, I want to know what you think about this, because you chose this movie.
Actually, I chose this movie.
You did?
Yeah, I chose it.
Oh, okay. William.
Rudy's movie is still forthcoming. We'll see that in a couple of weeks, and I'm hoping it will be a doozy. Why did I choose this movie? Well, I had seen it a couple of months ago, and actually, I believe Rudy is the one that let me know that it existed. And I saw it, and I just thought, this is in some ways the ultimate misery tourism movie. I kind of said that about Careful too, but this really is. I think this has everything, right? Mm-hmm. First of all, the tourism angle of misery tourism is perhaps more literally true in this movie than in some others, in that you're actually going to kind of exotic locale and immersing yourself in just about one of the most miserable, ugly situations you could imagine, the aftermath of a civil war, and not just any civil war, but a particularly gruesome civil war where no real rules of engagement applied, where women and children were killed pretty much indiscriminately, people were raped, child soldiers were utilized. But against that kind of horrific backdrop, you have this really intimate personal story of one individual's redemption. and like it functions as a real psychological profile of the former General Butt Naked. Like you get really deep into like how he works and why he's doing what he's doing. It's also, though, it's a story of the whole nation and how they're coming to terms with the aftermath of this horrific conflict. It's also a deeply, deeply, deeply ambiguous movie, and I'm sure anyone. We're only on the second episode here, but it's not going to take people long to realize how in love I am with ambiguity in anything and everything. But there is really I could imagine you watching this movie and coming to completely fantastically different polar opposite conclusions, right? It would be very easy, I think, to watch this movie as a true redemption story. In fact, I think you could take this movie and you could show it in an evangelical church, unironically, as a story of how one man turned his life around thanks to the love and intercession of Jesus Christ, right? You could make that argument, and you wouldn't have to take anything out of the movie. You wouldn't have to selectively edit the movie. You could show this movie as, a real conversion experience movie about how someone could go from being the most horrific human being you could imagine to being a man who is doing everything he can to turn his life around and make the world, or at least his world and his community, a better place, to do right by those people he harmed. But you could also view this movie in the total opposite sense of, this man's a fraud. This man's a con artist. Here's someone who is getting away, who is using Jesus Christ as a pretense to get away with war crimes, and who has found a really kind of ingenious way to do that. In which case, it becomes almost a satire on religion. But you could also view it, and there's a number anywhere between those 2 points is valid too. I think my opinion of it is somewhere in the middle. I think the movie gets intimate enough with him, the documentarians got intimate enough with him, that it is hard for me to believe that this man is totally insincere. There are moments when he seems legitimately sincere, but there are also moments that really undermine this idea that he's a totally fantastically changed man. So anyway, for all those reasons, I really wanted us to discuss the movie.
I mean, I actually went through all those phases you just mentioned as I was watching it. But I agree with you where there were definitely a lot of moments where, okay, I believe him. I believe that he is a good person now, more or less. But then there were other moments where I thought, he's really forcing it. And I don't know if I buy it. I know there was one moment, I don't think this is a spoiler, but where he told this guy, you have to forgive me. You have to forgive me. And I'm thinking, you can't make someone do that. That's really selfish to tell someone you have to forgive me for doing all this shit to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's something coercive almost about those moments of reconciliation. And I really do want to get into those in detail. But I want to get Rudy and AJ in on this conversation. So Rudy, sort of your preliminary thoughts on the movie?
My preliminary review is going to be pretty short because you guys already covered most of the stuff that I talk about. But I feel it's a largely uplifting movie. I'm not sure if that's because of my my feelings about certain things, or or because for me it was basically like a a ride the whole way through, because child soldiers plus General Butt Naked plus Liberian Civil War, and those are all things that I guess are in my wheelhouse. But
Right.
no, I think viewed even as like a like a well, I think you could view the movie like you said in those on either end of the spectrum there. But I feel like the way the movie is shot, the way is particularly the ending, which I won't spoil, but
Right.
it feels really almost like a Lion King, hug and feel good type of movie at the end. I'm not really sure like how to put it,
Right.
but no, I love the movie personally, and I love the little details that they give, which I guess we'll talk about later and more. But the movie has like a certain cadence, I guess, and I don't know if it's because the guy, he's such a charismatic personality, but there's a cadence to the movie that matches like, I guess, his cadence, which if you notice when he talks, like he's always like, you can tell this guy is either a preacher or like a
Right.
Hitler, because he talks the way he talks is just so like he's always move it gentlemen, and he's dancing around when he's talking, and he's a really charismatic figure, and it's like if there were ever like a like a war criminal to root for, I guess they picked the right one for this documentary, because I mean certainly most people will be kind of captivated by him.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's really
For sure.
Yeah, no, because I think that is really where they hit gold in this, finding this personality of this guy. Because there were a lot of, like, if you're just going for the misery tourism angle, I mean, there are a lot of generals and stuff in Liberia and warlords that you could, I mean, there's all kinds of generals with colorful names. There's General Bin Laden, General Mosquito, General Fly Swatter, or whatever. There's like a ton of them. I mean, and they all are like kind of have the theme of like working in the community afterwards to kind of redeem themselves and redeem the community. But this guy, I think, sticks out because of his, I don't really know what, I guess it would just be like a magnetic personality. Like, people are just attracted to him.
Right.
That's, I guess, why they followed him into battle and why they, follow him to church, I guess. It's
right.
That's
Yeah,
what
I definitely.
so interesting. I mean, like the fact that you can tell that this guy is definitely a leader, whether it's killing people or worshiping Jesus.
Yeah.
It's and throughout the whole movie, you can see that he's a powerful person. He's really like the psychological factor there when he's interacting with these people that he's hurt after he's committed these atrocities. It's really fascinating because
it is very fascinating.
He has to put himself in a position of power, whether that's leading, child soldiers into battle or, screaming, hallelujah a bunch of times in church.
Yeah, and kind of I think that point that you were both talking about, I don't think this is a spoiler. There's a scene about midway through the movie where he's in church, and he's in church with a bunch of his child soldiers, former child soldiers, right?
Yeah,
these are people who maybe they didn't follow him, but they're former child soldiers, and they're reformed now, or they're trying to turn their life around, and he has this ministry for them. And there's this moment where he's preaching to them, right? And he has them in this kind of little dingy makeshift chapel. And he starts really getting into the hallelujah stuff, and he gets them all going, right? And there's this moment where you're like, oh my God, he could just as easily be rallying the troops to go into battle as preaching to them. They may be screaming hallelujah, hallelujah, but it could just, because of the cadence there, and because there's this kind of underlying darkness to his delivery, he could just as easily be saying, kill, 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 as hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. And they're kind of jumping around, and there's this kind of menacing quality to that moment.
They're also loud and like they're very into it, but it's also like at the end they're like the General Butt Naked, he's at the front of the church, just kind of like screaming, really, and it's like
exactly.
It's in joy and sort of in worship, ? But it just has this sort of tone to it that really makes you aware of the entire story up to that point.
Right. So, I guess now let's do our actual reviews here. Are we going to stick with the vulture system? The X out of 5 vultures?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah, okay. It works.
So, I think we've covered the movie in broad enough strokes now to give people a sense of what to expect. And I think we're nearing the halfway point. I'm not sure. So, final reviews, and then how many vultures do you give it? Since this is my movie, I guess I'm obligated to go first with my review. I think that this was a fantastic movie. This is a really, really, really fabulous documentary. I think it's a shame that it's such an obscure documentary, because often like with documentaries, there seem to be almost like tiers, and there's a wide distance between the tiers. Like there's the 5 or 10 documentaries or whatever that get nominated for an Academy Award each year, right? And then there's all the others. And I think it's a shame that this movie seems to be in that second tier, that more obscure tier of documentaries, where you can't even find this on Netflix. You can't find it streaming anywhere.
Yeah.
I think you can. I'm not even going to speculate as to where you can buy it. If you go to the blog post, I'll have a link to where you can purchase it in the description of the episode. I'm pretty sure you can get it on Amazon, but there aren't a great many places you can go to buy this movie. And there's almost no place you can go to just stream it. So it's pretty obscure, and I think that's a real shame, because this is a really great documentary, I think. And it does a good job of doing something that documentaries, especially documentaries that are set in the aftermath of a war, or that are these kind of misery tourism documentaries, it does a really good job of not editorializing too much, of providing context without editorializing, right? It gives you a lot of information. It really gets deeply into General Butt Naked as an individual and the aftermath of what he's done, and what impact that has had on people, other people in Liberia, his victims, basically. But it doesn't at any point say, this is what you should think about this man. It never says, this is what you should walk away from the documentary with. It's very confident in letting you form your own opinions. It also, the documentarians themselves keep an admirable amount of distance here, except for one moment, which we'll talk about later. And that really, I think, improves it. Anyway, I've talked about this probably too much already. I'm going to say 4.5 out of 5 vultures, just half a vulture short of being like an absolute unmitigated classic. Sarah? We'll go Sarah, Rudy, AJ.
Right off the bat, I'm going to say I actually was going to give it 4.5 vultures too, because it is almost perfect. It makes you question everything, and I think that is a great thing to have in any movie. And I agree, it's a shame that you can't really find this anywhere. I've never heard of it, and it's so fascinating that I don't really understand why no one talks about this.
Yeah, it doesn't even have a Wikipedia page.
No, so we need to get the word out about General Butt Naked.
Right.
But no, I recommend this. I would recommend this to pretty much anyone. But yeah, so I'm glad that you suggested this movie because again, it's like I never would have heard of the movie. I never would have heard of him or that particular period in history in Liberia because again, it's like you just don't really hear about it, do you?
Right. No, I mean not. I mean even while the Civil War was going on, you didn't hear much about it in the American media, which
as usual.
Yeah.
No.
So, Rudy.
Okay. I think this is probably among one of the better documentaries I've seen. Probably
And
like
just to
Sherman.
provide some context there, you almost exclusively watch documentaries, and this is exactly the kind of documentary you watch. So that's high praise coming from you.
That's yeah. Yeah, like I mean, if like Sherman's March were at the top,
Mhm.
you know, and like Ice Road Truckers or something are at the bottom, like I don't know. Like, I mean, like this would be probably near the top. This would be almost like touching Sherman's March, like as far as documentary quality. But no, it's a great movie, and I think, like you said, Hank, there's a lot of ways you can view it, and so that I think that alone is a reason to watch it because the conversations you're gonna have with people about it. I mean, they're gonna be completely different because everybody's gonna have a completely different view of the movie, which I think adds a significant amount to it. And like Sarah said, the filmmakers did an admirable job of kind of keeping their distance and I it's hard for me to give it a rating because I mean obviously I think it's going to really depend on like who watches it. I mean like depending on what you get out of it, but I would give it probably I would say not less than 20,000 vultures out of 5 vultures.
You really hated this movie.
AJ.
For sure. I agree with pretty much everything that's been said so far. It's a really interesting story. It's got great characters. You're going to get something different out of it, so it's definitely worth it to watch it for yourself. Yeah, it's really fascinating, and I'd probably give it 8 out of 10 vultures.
AJ, you still. AJ, you were the one person among us who can do math, and you've got the math up on.
But
anyway, in fact, that simplifies. I'm not sure because I'm not good at math, but I'm pretty sure that simplifies down to 4 out of 5 vultures.
It does. Yes.
It simplifies down.
But I wouldn't rate it as highly as the others, probably because I don't know, just like emotionally, it probably wasn't my favorite movie. I still really enjoyed it, but like, yeah, like it's really approachable, even if you don't really care about the topic as much. But yeah, I'd say a firm 8 out of 10 vultures.
Yeah.
AJ, I would think you, of all of us, would be able to form some kind of emotional connection with a Liberian warlord.
Well, you know.
So anyway, I guess that will wrap up our spoiler-free portion of the podcast. If you've already seen the movie, or if you don't give a shit about spoilers, you just want to listen to us talk for some reason, you continue listening. If you haven't seen the movie yet and you want to see the movie, I recommend hit pause, watch the movie right now, come back, listen to the podcast. That seems like asking a lot, though, so just maybe bookmark the podcast and come back in a few days when you've finished watching it. Because now we're going to dive into the spoiler section of the podcast. And we were all kind of chomping at the bit to discuss this, so let's get this out of the way up front. Let's talk about those moments of reconciliation between him, between the former General Butt Naked and various people who he hurt or who his soldiers hurt. Hurt is a very light kind of preschool way to put it. I mean, these are people who lost family members, who there actually weren't any victims of rape that I remember, which I guess
that surprised me actually, because they did interview some women.
Right, and I was waiting. I was like, oh no.
Yeah, I had my moments like, oh shit, is it gonna go there? And how can you look at someone who you did that to?
I imagine that if this was a man who actually raped you, you would probably decline a chance.
Exactly. I think they were there. They just didn't want to be involved in that, and I wouldn't either. But I mean, there was the one where they murdered the woman's husband, and they blinded the daughter. Was she blinded in just one eye? I wasn't
in
sure.
one eye, yeah. She got hit with a rifle.
Right. Even though that was apparently an accident.
Right, yeah, he wasn't trying to blind the kid. It just happened to be there.
And I guess they, at least on camera, managed to forgive him, which I kind of questioned that. I wasn't sure, because it's like, well, you have the camera on you, and he's supposedly very religious now and trying to make things better for everybody around him. So it's kind of hard to say no to that.
Yeah, I mean, in all of the cases, like, you're in Liberia, like, the authority figures that you're dealing with, you're not dealing with, police and government, you're dealing with this man. It's like, this man is the authority figure, and he comes to you and, asks something of you, and if he is reconciled, then it's like, yes, maybe you'll forgive him, but the decision here for them, whether or not he's reconciled, isn't, do I believe him or not? It's, if he isn't and I don't forgive him, is he going to, murder me?
Right.
Yeah, I think these scenes, and there are about 4 of them in the movie, 3 or 4 scenes in the movie, where he meets a former victim of his, and he asks them for forgiveness. These scenes are so fascinating. And a large part, and I'm going to use that word again, but a large reason why they're so fascinating is because they are deeply ambiguous. You could see how they could be taken either way. You could take them at face value, right? And you could see them as these really cathartic moments for the victims, because they do start to break down crying, and it's kind of difficult to read where those tears are coming from. Are those tears of relief? Are they tears of joy? Are they just really tears of catharsis? Are they afraid right now? Are they angry? Is this rage bubbling up? It's really hard to tell, but you could read it as this is this really cathartic moment of reconciliation, where you have the victim on one hand, the perpetrator on the other, and to General Butt Naked's credit, he's the only one doing this, right? There are plenty of other Liberian warlords, and some of them, as the movie points out, are still serving in the Liberian government now, or at least when the movie was filmed, who have made no attempt at reconciliation, have made no attempt to seek forgiveness, have not even acknowledged their crimes. So to have someone come forward, if you're a victim, and to go to you personally and say, damn, I'm sorry. I am legitimately, honestly sorry. There's nothing I can do to repay what I've done to your family, but I would like to do whatever I can, and I would like your forgiveness. I can see why that can be a sincere moment of relief for someone.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, And if you were to take just the transcripts of these moments, right? Just the text of what gets said with like little little descriptions, like she starts crying or whatever at this point. I think that's how you would read it. You would read it as a moment of sincere reconciliation. But Jesus Christ, check out the body language in some of these scenes, right?
Yeah.
And then you see something that's so, to me anyway, so different. Because he, like, imagine for a second, AJ, I'm begging you for forgiveness, right? How am I going to present myself to appear contrite? I'm probably going to try to make myself look small, right? I'm probably going to be like, oh, AJ, lower my voice. Say, AJ, I'm so sorry, please, But when he's doing this, he makes himself as large as possible. There's this one really fascinating one where he's talking to a man whose family he killed, and he's leaning there with one hand against the wall, just kind of like all opened up, right? And he's saying, please forgive me, but he's almost like leaning over this guy, and he is so much bigger than this guy. This guy is like my size, like he's a tiny guy, right? He may be a little bit bigger than me, but he's not. And this guy is not only is Joshua Milton Bly big, but he's making himself big, right? The posture he's taking and the way he's leaning, he's just dominating this guy. And this little guy is standing there, and he's got his arms crossed over his body, like defensively. And so he's saying, "Oh yeah, I forgive you." But like the impression you get is that this guy is. You would think that the one being intimidated would be the one begging for forgiveness, but that's not the impression you get from the way this scene plays out. So it's really weird.
Actually,
Those are some of my favorite scenes.
Yeah, I want to touch on that scene some more, actually, because first of all, I did not think that guy was going to end up forgiving him because I felt like he was really angry right before, and then he just breaks down crying and hugs him. But I don't know if you noticed, but the filmmakers decided to kind of zoom in on Butt Naked. I'm just going to call him Butt Naked, and how he kind of had his one hand behind his back the entire time he was in the hug, which I thought was really strange. Like he wasn't that involved, and that to me was one of the moments where I really questioned his sincerity. And like you said, he is very, very dominating, and like you guys were saying earlier, how he's a leader in everything he does. I think he likes the attention, he likes the power, no matter what he's doing.
Yeah.
So that really made me question if he was sincere about all of that, especially in that scene though, just because that guy he just broke down, which I did not expect. He's like, I forgive you. Like, really? I thought you were gonna kill him.
Right.
No, it's really fascinating.
Right. And to what you said about him having his hand behind his back, you almost expect him to have his fingers crossed, right? Like you do when
we should talk about the child soldier who he shot and kind of ruined his life. That was
That's a big one. I want to get Rudy and AJ into these reconciliation scenes. So before that is the major one, but I want to give them a chance to kind of.
I mean, the one where he was apologizing to the woman and her child that he brutalized there with the gun barrel to her face. That one, he was kind of. I noticed there was a part where he was kind of like shaking his head, and like he closed his eyes. She was explaining something, and he closed his eyes, and he kind of shook his head, and he was like a kind of, I don't know, a gesture of like, well. And I think that it's kind of like, is he saying, is he thinking about what he did, or is he trying to kind of ease the pressure of like the situation by saying, well, oh boy, that was a bad time, that was a bad situation. that was war. I mean, that's basically.
Yeah.
I think he actually, when one of the people the first woman there, he apologizes for killing her brother. he says, "I'm sorry, it was a war." You know, I think he actually said that. He said it was war. You know, I'm sorry, I didn't really. So I think a lot of it comes. A lot of the responses you see, they come from like people just wanting to like forget about it or put that, you know, put that behind them. It's like if nobody wants to talk about this shit, you know, at all. And like if the guy who did it comes to apologize and he's not there with a machete trying to kill you, then that's like a bonus. I don't, most people, I think that, I mean, he would even be there, you know, that this guy who commanded troops that, you know, destroyed their houses and, you know, raped them or killed their family or did whatever, would even be there. I mean, it's like a mind fuck almost. Like, you know, like how is that? How do you, I mean, so I think a lot of that is part of the response.
AJ?
Definitely. I mean, like, just kind of imagining it from their perspective, like, you know, something terrible happened and they're just living their lives, and then, you know, this guy just shows up and he's the one who did it. Like, it's real, like, the reactions that you're getting are so surprising and at the same time exactly what you'd expect as well.
Yeah.
Like, you wouldn't possibly imagine that they could forgive him, but then they're in this situation where they're, you know, they kind of have to, sort of, like they're presented with this man who did things like kill their brother or, you know, kill their entire family. And you don't know whether or not he's serious or if he's just trying to present a sort of personality that he's become. I think the fact that in most all of these, like you said, he's dominating, but he's also like, you know, like he pushes himself on those victims quite a bit. Like particularly with the woman who he killed her brother. He's like, you know, he said to her, he's like, I know you don't have a brother now, but, you know, I can play the brother for you. I can, you know, whenever you need brotherly counsel, call on me. And it was
what an enticing offer.
I know, it was so odd because you think about that and you're like, how could he possibly think that she would come to him after that, you know? But then it's not so unimaginable. Like it seems like something designed very specifically to put out an image of a contrite individual. But throughout the movie, at least I felt that he was very sincere, because why else would he go through all this trouble? Not sincere as in, you know, he's per se a better person now, but sincere as in he is going through this path sincerely because that's the type of person he is. He needs to be having that attention, doing that process of people knowing who he is and being able to command people. And this one's just safer, perhaps.
Yeah.
That was a really awkward scene because he really wouldn't leave her alone, and you could tell she just wanted to get away from him, and he wouldn't let her. So that was kind of hard to watch, actually, because it's like he's not getting that cue, or he's getting it, but he doesn't care. He wants to get what he wants, which is part of his personality.
He's like physically way, I think, wasn't he? I mean, didn't he basically put his arm there and say, like, you know, he can't leave?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, was she the only one who didn't forgive him? At least not on camera. I don't think they kind of just left that scene, because I don't think she said, yeah, I forgive you. I think she just wanted him to go away.
Yeah. Right. You didn't get the impression that some of these scenes, it's remarkable how emotional they became eventually. But that one, you could see wasn't happening. I mean, I do want to talk about what Sarah mentioned, which is the Sinigalees angle, because that kind of forms the emotional heart of this movie. But before we move away from this, I wanted to talk about one thing in that in the reconciliation scene between General Butt Naked and the woman whose husband was killed and whose daughter was blinded. A really interesting moment happens, and I wasn't sure what to make of it. So he tells her basically, okay, well, tell me what happened to you because I don't remember.
Mhm.
And she says, well, she talks about how she was out just, I don't know, doing her chores or whatever, and she hears someone yell, General Butt Naked's coming, or Butt Naked is coming, or something like that. And she runs inside. And then she starts to describe what happens inside her house. And she says, he came in, right? She doesn't say you.
Yeah.
She doesn't say you came in. You took the baby from my arms. You shot my husband dead. She says, he came in. He shot my husband. He hit my baby in the face with the butt of his rifle.
Mm-hmm.
And that was interesting to me because you could read it a few different ways. One way, the easy interpretation, I guess, is that she hasn't put this together in her head yet. She doesn't totally understand, hasn't totally processed the fact that the guy who killed her family, who shot her husband in front of her, who hit her infant daughter at that point in time in the face with a rifle, is the same guy who's standing right in front of her.
Mhm.
But there's also a possibility that, now remember, he doesn't remember this. There's also a very good possibility, I would imagine, that the guy who did this to her was not butt naked himself, but one of his soldiers. And that, in effect, he's apologizing for them and taking responsibility for them. But he doesn't seem to have any memory of this. And it's really interesting because then, later, he goes into the church, right? And he's giving his sermon. And she's there, and he has her stand up and come up. And then he tells that story. And when he tells it again, he takes full ownership of it, like he remembers it, even though he's basically reciting the story she just told him. He said, I killed this woman's husband. I took the baby from her arms.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, huh. Is he in that moment basically taking responsibility for something that he didn't do personally? Is he making this narrative that isn't totally personal, isn't totally clear, into a personal narrative? It's just a really weird, interesting scene. And certainly he had no memory of it before. Whether he did that personally or not, he had no memory of it before he talked to her. But then see how quickly he integrates it into his worldview, into his sermon, how quickly it becomes a part of his world, and how much that narrative of him as this ghastly guy, this guy who's capable of doing that, is bolstered by these narratives that are questionable, and then become part of this larger redemption narrative, which maybe also is a little questionable.
Right.
It was just, I don't know, one of those moments where there's this, and the documentarians, the filmmakers never cut in and say this is what happened, never try to clarify what actually happened to that woman and her husband and her daughter, and whether Butt Naked actually did it, whether it was one of his soldiers, whether there's more to the story. So you're just left in this kind of weird middle space trying to tease it out, and it adds a little bit of psychological depth, I think, to what's going on.
Yeah.
It does, because I think he probably didn't know how else to tell it other than I did it, because what else are you going to say? Oh, one of my soldiers did it. It's just that doesn't have the same impact, because he was trying to spin it so that he looked good in an odd way, just by confessing to doing it, rather than putting it on somebody else, which wouldn't have made him look
It all seems to be about power, really.
It does. But I still think throughout the whole movie, despite he's trying to do good, he's trying to help these people. It's really about what he wants. That was the feeling I got at the end. It was really just about making himself look good and feel better, and having people like him and accept him, so that he could, retain this power and live a somewhat normal life as well. Because again, we haven't mentioned it yet, but he's married with kids, and that surprised me actually. And his wife, I think, what did she say? She was scared of him when she first met him, yet she ended up marrying him. So it was really interesting.
It's a similar dynamic there with his wife as with his victims, right? Where at first she's like, "Oh fuck, no, I don't want anything to do with this," and then somehow she's pulled into his orbit, right?
Yeah.
And basically gives in to him. And the wedding photo. Do you remember the wedding photo?
Oh yeah.
Where it's almost like she's telling the story where she comes home after her wedding day and she realizes, wow, I'm married to the general butt naked. And they have this wedding photo where you could it's almost like they captured the moment where she's like, wait. Oh shit.
Yeah.
No, and you could see afterwards during the movie she was just not into it anymore. But you can't really see that she was ever into it. Because like you said in the wedding photo, she didn't look happy at all. And throughout every scene that she was in, she didn't look happy. She was like, I'm so tired of this marriage. So you felt bad for her because she had what do they have, 4 kids? Something like that.
4 or 5, something
like that. Yeah, it's a lot of kids. So she was kind of stuck.
Yeah. To that question, though, and I think this is a good segue to the Sinigalees thing. So, Sarah, it seems like you're pretty convinced that his motivations here were largely selfish. He's a pretty self-interested guy. And I think that the movie would almost unanimously in some way make that case if it wasn't for the Sinigalees story. And I know you tried to get into that, so let me turn that over. I guess I'll let you introduce that part.
All right, so what's his name again? Sinigalees?
Sinigalees is his battle tag or whatever, his battle.net ID.
So Sinigalees was one of Butt Naked's child soldiers, and I guess one night he accused Sinigalees of lying, and he shot both of his legs, dragged him into a bathroom, and just left him there for a week. And somehow he didn't die. They didn't really explain that, but eventually he was rescued, but it was too late. They had to amputate both of his legs, and now all these years later, Butt Naked tracks him down, and of course wants his forgiveness. And honestly, of all the characters who I thought wouldn't forgive him, I didn't think this guy would. Because that was just so brutal and cruel, just to do that to anybody.
Right.
But he ends up forgiving him, and I guess Butt Naked he tries to take care of some of these people, some of the former child soldiers. And then in the end, Sinigalees actually dies. Does he get TB, I think?
Yeah, he contracts tuberculosis. I mean, he's living as a beggar, right? He gets wheeled around in his wheelchair. He has a little box, and he begs people for money to subsist from day to day. And eventually, General Butt Naked is in exile because he believes people want to kill him. So he takes off again, and that's a whole nother story. But while he's in exile, Sinigalees contracts tuberculosis. He goes to the hospital. The hospital, which apparently, believe it or not, they don't have socialized medicine in Liberia. He can't pay his hospital bills, so the hospital kicks him out, and he ends up dying of tuberculosis. And that moment, when General Butt Naked, when Joshua Milton Bly discovers that Sinigalees has died, is one of the most really interesting, maybe moving moments in the movie. I guess he gets an email about it, right? And he's reading this email, and he starts to break down. For the first time in the movie, you see his facade start to drop, and you can tell he's going to cry. And he turns to the filmmakers and he says, you know what? No, fuck you. like I know you want your story basically, but you're not going to get this. And he gets up and he goes to the bathroom and he shuts the door. And then this wonderful thing happens where the cameraman gets up and he moves over to the bathroom door. And in the process of doing that, it just happens that there's this mirror on the wall, right? And for the only moment in the film, you catch a vision of the filmmaker. This is someone who never talks straight. He doesn't do the Errol Morris thing where sometimes you hear him interviewing someone and you hear his voice. The filmmaker up to this point has been totally invisible. But because he needs to get that shot, he needs to get close to the bathroom door to hear butt naked crying, right? He needs it. He steps in there and you can see him reflected in the mirror. And that moment I thought was just sublime. Like, it was almost like a transcendental moment. Because you, as the audience, suddenly you're like, oh yeah, I'm rubbernecking at this shit too. Like, it implicates you. It implicates the filmmaker. And it makes you uniquely aware of exactly what's going on here, right? In terms of your participation in this, and the filmmaker's participation. And I don't know. I have a feeling Rudy might have something he wants to say about this too. So.
Actually, no. You pretty much covered what I was gonna say about that. I mean, yeah, it's basically like, I mean, it's like, yeah, you're a voyeur too. I mean, everybody's a voyeur here, in this situation. So I mean, that was a really powerful scene. I think that was, and the fact they left it in there, I think says something about the film crew and the intent of the film, I guess.
Right. That must have been a really hard decision to make, whether to leave that scene in or not. Because on the one hand, that's your money shot, right? That's the one moment where you have what's definitely an honest, uncontaminated expression of emotion from your main character, from your subject. And if you were to, and I could see someone viewing the movie and ignoring the thing with the mirror and just being like, because you hear him in the bathroom and he's like, oh God, why is this still going on? When is this nightmare going to end, right? And that in and of itself is pretty powerful, to realize that this guy there's some self-reflection going on here. That this whole shitstorm of a life has impacted him emotionally, and he's not this calculating sociopath who's just like, this is what I do to survive, this is what I do to survive, this is what I do to survive.
Right.
So that alone, so as a filmmaker, like, I have that moment, but the only way I got it, the only way I could get that moment was to totally implicate myself. And if you're not looking for that level of irony or that level of that meta level, if you're hoping not to have any meta aspects to your film, it must be, that mirror shot must be kind of disappointing, and you must be like, oh, what do I do here? But I think I'm so glad they left it in, because it was beautiful and perfect.
Yeah.
And I think that was interesting too, because I think that was the point where he finally decided to go home, if I'm not mistaken. And it wasn't he left his family for what, 6 months, they said? He just left them to take care of themselves, and that wasn't enough to bring him back necessarily. It was, I think, this guy dying, where he's like, okay, I need to stop running from whoever, and I need to take care of this.
Right. And that's an interesting question, right? Did he go home because he felt the coast was clear, or did he go home because the death of Sinigalees made him realize there are all these other veterans of the Liberian Civil War who he's been helping, who he has a responsibility to, and fuck it, I'm going to go back and I'm going to help them even if it puts my life at risk. In which case, if that's the truth, then it really does in some way become a pretty authentic redemption narrative. But if he was just like, I think it's okay back there, I kind of miss my kids, and I don't know. So there's one big topic I want to hit. I have a feeling we're shading towards an hour here, but I really want to get into his actual conversion experience, because this is amazing. This is something right out of the Bible.
Yeah, it is.
It really is, isn't it? So basically, this Liberian preacher, this bishop actually, believes he gets a call from God, right? You're going to go and you're going to convert General Butt Naked. And that in and of itself, like, that's Old Testament right there, right? So he goes to his compound or whatever in this really shady, like, nightmare, and they actually have footage of the building, and it is as horrifying as you could imagine. You'd imagine, right? This really
what do they call it? The Butt Naked Barracks or something?
Yeah.
Butt Naked Barracks. Yeah. So he goes to the barracks, right? And he walks in to the barracks, into this totally hostile territory, and he gets an audience with Butt Naked himself. He just walks in to his room, basically, and the general's like, how the hell did you get it? But somehow he manages to talk him into making a confession of faith, and then he just leaves. He gets him to pray and accept Jesus into his heart, and he just leaves. He gets in unmolested, and he leaves unmolested. And then there's this moment where Butt Naked gets up and he goes to Sinigalees, and he says, how did this man get in here? There was a man here. Why did you let him pass? And Sinigalees says, I saw no man. I'm getting a little biblical in my rephrasing of it, right? But that's what it is, right? And Butt Naked says, there was a man here. He came in here and he talked to me. How did he get by you? And Sinigalees says, there was no man. And Butt Naked says, fuck you. There was a guy. He came in here. He spoke to me. He got by you. You're lying to me. And Sinigalees says, there was no man. So, and if this was just a straight up narrative from the New Testament, it would have ended there. But because this is the real world, Butt Naked takes out his big Magnum revolver and blows his legs off. And at that moment, and then, you know, he gets dragged in the bathroom and everything else that Sarah described. But that moment is so fascinating because it is right out of the Bible. It really is. I mean, there are all these moments in the Bible where something like that happens, where there's this miraculous conversion experience or something, where angels or prophets walk past guards. People just walk out of prison, and the guards don't see them. And there are all these moments where there's an implication that something supernatural has happened. And one way of looking at this narrative, and if you were showing this movie, as I said in the beginning, as like an evangelical Christian movie, you have like the perfect set piece there in his conversion. But if you're poor fucking Sinigalees, this wasn't the moment that you were converted. This was the moment that some fucker blew your legs off for no reason. You were just trying to do your job. You didn't see anyone. And it is just like, there are so many really fascinating biblical parallels and allusions here. Like, if this wasn't a true story, you would think it was something out of Flannery O'Connor, right? You would think that this was like a piece of dark Christian fiction, just because of how effectively that works and how tight the religious parallels are. I don't know. Did anyone else want to say anything about that?
You know, I think you're right. Actually, I didn't think about that until you pointed it out. But that did work in that sense. It really supported the narrative and the entire movie, actually. But I felt so bad for Sinigalees, though, because that was the moment where his life officially went down the toilet.
Yeah, right.
That wasn't out already. But, yeah.
If you consider Sinigalees and General Butt Naked the two major characters in this movie, this is the ultimate turning point for both of them, right? This is the moment of Butt Naked's conversion, but it's also the moment Sinigalees' life, as you said, is destroyed. And it's another one of those things where the paths go off in both directions. If you're butt naked, this is the moment that your life turns around. This is the beginning of the redemption narrative. If you're Sinigalees, this is it. This is the point of no return. Did AJ or Rudy want to weigh in on that?
I thought that, like, the kind of parallels, like, the biblical aspect was really fascinating. General Butt Naked himself, reminded me of, like, he's this very powerful person. And, I grew up in, a Christian home and read Left Behind series where, the Antichrist makes his appearance as this person that everyone loves except for the Christians who can see past his charisma and, magnetic personality. And there seemed to be some type of lingering atmosphere of that, sort of dynamic of, this man who is loved by so many people and then hated, just completely detested by others.
Right.
And then, and like you said, in the middle there's this conversion story that's like literally straight out of the Bible, which is almost hilarious in the fact that it's just so perfect for the story that he's trying to convey. And
Right.
it's sort of uncanny, the fact that this man was involved in, like, you would expect it. He's this big personality, and you have no idea what actually happened, because on the one hand, like, that's, something supernatural, but on the other hand,
Maybe.
yeah, exactly. Like, there's people to, like, there's the pastor that they talk to, and there's Sinigalees himself, and there's that conviction that all of their stories were right.
Right.
But
yeah,
you just have no idea. Exactly.
Yeah. Rudy?
That was definitely, the biblical element was definitely a big thing. But also just the magical realism of it. It actually reminded me of another movie, not a documentary, but a film, War Witch, which was about Democratic Republic of Congo and some child soldiers there. And it had a lot of supernatural themes and a lot of like magical stuff in it.
Right.
I guess
or borderline moments of, like you said, magical realism. Yeah.
Yeah, and that kind of, I guess that kind of underscores like how the whole conflict steeped in this weird supernatural type stuff.
Right.
Yeah. Because you have, like, at the beginning, you have a bunch of scenes where it's sort of emphasizing the premise of, going into battle naked is this type of magical thing. And there's, like, scenes that indicate, voodoo and people with guns and masks. And that's a really fascinating scene, because it sort of, and then you have that contrasted with, like, the scenes of reconciliation, where it's just this really real, mundane sort of, like, these are people in their normal lives,
Yeah, it's very personal drama, very, as you said, mundane.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So I do think we are closing in on an hour now. We could probably talk about this movie for another hour, but I do want to keep the podcast in the neighborhood of an hour. There is something that I wanted to mention, though, and I don't want to use the word costuming, because obviously obviously everyone is dressed authentically because it's a documentary. Everyone's just wearing the clothes that they would be wearing, and maybe I'm getting a little bit into bad white voyeur territory. Some of the t-shirts, some of the t-shirts that some of the characters, not characters, that some of the people were, like, there was a guy who was literally wearing a t-shirt that said US Aid, right?
Yeah, that guy.
That was pretty remarkable. And I had no idea that Jack Daniels made t-shirts in child size. But yeah, it was hard for me. There were moments when that may have almost taken me out of the film.
Yeah, I mean, there's a British rapper named Lethal Bizzle, and he dresses kind of like General Butt Naked. So I was kind of thinking of like him. And I don't know, that is probably like well into bad white voyeur territory. I don't know. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. It just, the costuming, it definitely was. It was unique. It was choice.
Yeah, they're definitely.
Even though that is the way people dress over there, I guess. So.
Right. I mean, I guess that's kind of the end result of global capitalism, right?
Yeah.
Like, Jack Daniels is like, oh yeah, it turns out there's not a great big market for t-shirts that say Jack Daniels on them that are in child sizes in the West. I guess we better donate these. And they end up in a USAID bucket somewhere, and they end up in a refugee camp, which is kind of fascinating, I guess, but also kind of distracting and sad. Actually, on the bad white voyeur point, that's something that I wanted to bring up about this movie that I didn't, is it very effectively avoids there's a certain kind of movie like this where the filmmakers will try to tell a story about some international tragedy, a story that's set in the aftermath of a war or a genocide or something in the developing world, and they'll do one of two things. They'll either, as I said earlier, feel the need to really, 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 really editorialize, like, just to let you know, like, as a white man from the West, this is bad. And for all you other white people in the West, this isn't voyeurism. This is bad shit that happened, and we feel really bad about it, right? You know, have the filmmaker come on, and what that ends up being really fucking condescending and does a real disservice to the subject. And there's the other thing that these films will sometimes do is find a white subject as a point of entry. And there's one film that I saw that was a particularly egregious example of it. If the redemption of General Butt Naked is how to do a documentary about tragedy in Africa right, this other documentary. Rudy, I looked it up, and I want to make sure that I have the right title. I think I do. It was called The Devil Came on Horseback. It was about the Sudanese genocide. Did you watch that?
I probably have. I don't remember it very well, though.
Anyway,
I know the name.
It made me furiously angry because the whole movie is basically following this member of the U.S. Armed Forces around as he's like engaged in the genocide in Sudan, like trying to prevent it, trying to raise awareness or something. And it is so fixed on his perspective, it only veers off every now and again to like show you how badly the Sudanese people are suffering. But like the climatic moment in this film spoiler alert, I guess, is that this guy, this white dude in Africa, like breaks down and cries because he's overwhelmed by all this shit that he's seen. And to me, that's just like how, like, that's the worst possible way to handle a documentary like this, right?
Yeah.
It's like, it's like, and it's almost like, oh yeah, well, this guy needs to be there to be a proxy for the viewers who wouldn't get this otherwise, or who wouldn't understand what they're supposed to be feeling if they don't see a white dude on the screen. And not just a white, like, this isn't really racial. What it is, it's class and it's geographic. If you don't see a middle class Western guy up there to tell you how to feel, you're not going to get it. You're not going to be able to process this. And it just seems so, ugh. I mean, I'm not a person who feels icky after I watch movies, obviously. Like this, but I felt so icky after watching that movie. I was like, ugh, like this is this. I don't know. Yeah. So my point is, this movie doesn't do that. It doesn't have a lot of the filmmakers being like sitting down. Another thing that these documentaries will do, they'll like have the filmmakers interview themselves.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and they'll be like, oh my God, I was so horrified by what I saw. As if, and it in a way that becomes the focus of the documentary, not the actual subject. And this documentary admirably avoided doing any of that, except for that one kind of sublime moment with the mirror.
Mm-hmm.
So, any final thoughts on this? On the film before we wrap up?
I have no thoughts on it.
No thoughts?
No thoughts at all.
Definitely, it's a great film, and like you said, I appreciate the way they went about it. They didn't make it about themselves because, yeah, I think we've all seen documentaries where they do that. It's like, oh, this is how I feel about this subject, and so, well, we don't care.
Right.
It's not about what you think. It's about what, you know, everything else, the subject and what the cameras capture. No, so I think it was very successfully done. I think it's going to leave some people probably feeling conflicted. Well, I guess I don't know how conflicted I am, to be honest, because for the most part I felt like he was sincere, but I do also feel like it was kind of selfish on his part, at least in certain moments.
Right. Rudy?
Since sincerity was mentioned, I guess this brings up this feeling, or this documentary brought up for me like a question of what is sincerity, as far as, you know, like how sincere do you have to be apologetic, or to be, especially in a situation like that nobody in the West is ever going to really experience.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, the guy killed, like he said at the TRC court, not less than 20,000 people or whatever. He was responsible for that. I mean, how do you even?
Yeah.
You know, it's difficult to.
Yeah. What would a sincere reconciliation for the deaths of 20,000 people look like?
Yeah, that's the thing. And so it's really thought-provoking documentary. I thought I would definitely give it a watch.
HA?
Yeah, I would definitely recommend it. It's a good story. It's got a lot of interesting psychological moments that you can sort of stew over and try to unpack, but it's not simply packed so that you can digest all of them, which is something that I really enjoyed. Yeah, it's very captivating. Would definitely recommend it.
Cool. So I think we'll leave it at that. I do know that we're over an hour now. Maybe I can turn the podcast an hour. Maybe I can't. We'll see what happens. So thank you to our contributors. Each and every one of them has stuff up on our website. Once again, miserytourism.com. And I encourage you to check out Sarah's work, AJ's work, and Rudy's work on the website. Yeah. thank you for listening, and tune in again in probably 2 weeks. We're trying to do this every 2 weeks, where we'll be tackling a movie of AJ's choice, which is Hard Candy. So hope you'll tune in then. Hope you enjoyed the show. So I guess bye. And then I guess
Bye-bye.
See you guys.
say goodbye at that point. Fuck it.